Okay, for the students who are taking this unit in conservation and management of natural resources, there is an aspect that we have to look at, which is about ethology. Okay, so in ethology, what you'll be trying to study from a scientific perspective is you'll be trying to look at how animals behave. Okay, so when you put an animal in its normal habitat, in its natural environment, what behavior does that animal portray? So that branch of science which looks at how animals behave once they are in their natural habitats, once they are in their natural environment, that branch is what we call ethology. In this case, what we mean by behavior, that means anything that the particular animal does in its natural habitat. Okay, so anything that the animal does, for example, if the animal eats, if the animal sleeps, if it's fighting, mating, building nests, okay, so anything that the animal does while it's in its natural habitat, that is the behavior. That is how the animal will be behaving. Okay, so ethology will try to answer some important questions about how the animal is behaving. So one of those questions will be, why is the animal behaving the way it is behaving? Okay. If the animal is barking, for example, why is the animal barking? Then the behavior that the animal is portraying, is it something inherited or it is something that the animal just acquired in the course of its life? Then looking at that behavior, does it in any way help the animal to survive? Does that behavior confer any survival advantage for the animal, or the behavior does not give the animal any ability, does not improve the ability of the animal to survive more? The last question that ethology desires to answer is, has that behavior that the animal is portraying, has that behavior evolved or changed over time? Or the behavior has remained constant? So when you answer those four questions, then you'll have been in a position to now understand ethology fully. So as you see then, ethology combines ideas from different fields. We are studying animals, so that is field of zoology. But you are looking at how this animal behaves in its natural environment. So that is ecology, because you want to understand, is that behavior helping the animal, for example, to interact better? Okay. Then there is an aspect of evolutionary biology, because you want to understand, has that behavior changed? Has it evolved over time? Then equally, it borrows from genetics, because you compare animals at different ages within the same type. So to understand if an older animal behaves the same as a younger animal, you're looking at genetics. They have to be related. Okay. So simply put then, ethology helps us to understand what animals do, how they do what they do, and why they do what they do. So, what is it that the animals are doing? And how do they do whatever it is that they are doing? And why are they doing that which the animals are doing? So once we understand those three questions, then we'll have understood ethology. Ethology just helps us to understand those three major issues. Okay. Ethology has undergone various development. And as we know it in the modern day, it has been developed mainly by very great inputs from three scientists. One of those scientists is Konrad Lorenz. And what Lorenz did, he studied imprinting. Okay. In this case, imprinting refers to that rapid form of learning that happens very early in life, mostly just after birth of an animal, or if the animals that hatch, like the birds, just after the bird has hatched. What is it? What learning happens at that particular point? Okay. So whatever is learned at that particular point, that's what Lawrence studied, and that's what he called imprinting. So imprinting happens during a very short but critical period. Then once it has happened at that very critical period, it leads to the formation of a very strong attachment. So once an animal has been given birth to, once a bird has been hatched, what is it that it learns at that very particular point? Lawrence gives an example that he observed how the geese, the young geese, will follow any fast moving object they saw just after hatching. So it didn't matter if that fast moving object was either a human being or their mother, the mother of those young geese. So immediately after hatching, if a human being will be the first thing moving, then those young geese will follow that human being. So whatever it is that they see, the first thing they see, and it has to be moving, then they follow. If it is their mother, they will follow the mother. If it is not their mother, but anything else, then the young geese will follow that. So that observation that these young geese will follow anything that they see moving, the first thing they see moving after being hatched. That observation showed that some behaviors are instinctive or they are inborn. Because remember, these young geese are following without being taught. So once they see something moving, they follow. The first thing they see after they hatch that is moving, they follow that thing. They don't even know what that thing is. Okay, so that is a behavior that is inborn. No one has taught them that. Okay, but what is important is the experience at a specific time can then shape behavior. Okay, so the experience they are having at that particular time after hatching, after being hatched, it shapes their behavior. Okay, so it doesn't mean that they need to be taught when they've grown up so that they can shape their behavior. But once they have that experience at that particular time, just after hatching, they pick it up and their behavior is shaped. Another scientist who is called Nicholas Tinbergen. For him, the biggest contribution he made in ethology was helping people to understand how to study the behavior of animals from a scientific perspective. To do that, he proposed four key questions of behavior. Okay. So according to him, if you want to understand any behavior of a particular animal, then you have to ask four main questions. So one of those questions that you need to ask is the causation, the mechanism that is leading to that behavior. So what triggers that behavior? What causes that behavior? Okay. If, for example, there is a rooster that is crowing in the morning, what causes that rooster to crow? Kitu gani inafanya hiyo jogoo iwike asubuhi? Okay. So one could say possibly it's the sunrise. It is seeing the stimulus from light, then it triggers it to crow. Another one will say it's possibly hormonal. But with that, you are trying to understand what is the cause, what makes an animal to do a particular thing, what causes it to do. Okay. The second question is about development. With that, you are looking at how does a particular behavior develop in the course of an animal's lifetime. For example, if you are looking at a bird, does it learn the song that the bird sings? Does it learn it from its parents? Or is the bird born knowing that song already? So how is that song developed? Is it that once the bird is hatched, it already knows that song, or it has to be hatched, then it will listen to its parents sing. Then it also learns how to sing. Okay. So that's about development. How has that ability of the birds to sing, how has it developed in the bird's lifetime? Another question is about function. The behavior that a particular animal is portraying, does that behavior in any way help the animal to survive, or does it help the animal to reproduce? Okay. So, for example, when a bird is singing, that singing can help in attracting mates. Okay. And equally, that singing can also help the bird in defending its territory. So that's the function of the singing. Okay. So how does that behavior help that animal to survive? How does that behavior help that animal to bring forth young ones? The fourth question is the evolution of that behavior. How did the behavior evolve or change over generations? So, for example, if you have birds that are closely related, do they sing similar songs or they still sing different songs? So, if they sing similar songs, then it's possible that birds of a particular species they have to sing common songs. But if you find birds of a common species singing different songs, then possibly there is a change, either as the bird ages or as the bird experiences a different environment. The third scientist, his name is Frisch. The main contribution that this scientist did was to help us understand how honeybees communicate. Okay. The communication in honeybees. So you see bees, they have what we call the waggle dance. Okay, so a worker bee will come and perform a very special movement, and that performance, that movement, which is called the waggle dance, will be done to communicate, to tell other bees where food is located. So the direction of the dance, where the bee is facing as it dances, that is where the food is. But the length of the waggle dance will show how far the food is. So if it dances for a short time, then the food is just within a very short distance. But if the worker bee dances for a long time, then it would show that the food is found at a very far place. Okay. So with this discovery, it showed that insects have a very complex way of communicating because the worker bee is trying to tell others where the food is. It has to dance in a particular direction. So the direction of the dance is indicating where the food is. But how far? Okay, knowing where it is without knowing how far, it might not be very helpful. So the length of that dance indicates the distance from where the bees are to where they can actually access the food. So in ethology, there are few key terminologies or concepts. The first thing we can talk about at times is it an instinct or is it something that is learned? So if it is a behavior which is instinctive, then you can say that behavior is innate. Instinctive, that means it is something inborn. It's something that does not require learning. Okay? Something that is present from birth. So a spider is not taught how to spin a web, for example. It is born knowing. So nothing teaches the spider how to do it, to make the spider web. So that is an instinctive behavior. A learned behavior, on the other hand, is something that is acquired through experience. Okay, so it is acquired through experience. It means it is an attribute, it is a behavior that an animal acquires, an animal learns, but is never born knowing that. Okay, so ikizaliwa haijui, but ikiendelea kuishi inajua jinsi ya kufanya kitu fulani. So that is something learned, that is something that has been acquired through experience. Most of this learned behavior will be influenced largely by the environment. Okay? Because remember, each animal will be learning depending on the environment that is living in. You can only learn how to swim when you are living near water. You only learn how to climb trees if you are living closer to a what? A forest. So the learned behavior, yes, is acquired through experience, but it is influenced largely by the environment. So most behaviors in animals is a combination of both. Okay. So you find there are some which are innate. The animal is born with that particular behavior, born knowing. But there are others which the animal learned. It was not born knowing how to do it, but it learned it with experience. Of course, under the influence of its immediate environment. The second concept is the word adaptation. An adaptation is a characteristic which improves either the survival or reproduction ability of an animal. Any characteristic that enhances the ability of an animal to survive, an organism to produce more, then that is an adaptation. These adaptations can happen in three main ways. One, it can be a characteristic that leads to the body form, the body shape to change. So that is a structural adaptation. Inarefuka ama inakuwa mnono ama kitu inabadilika kwa mwili. Okay, so that's a structural adaptation. The second way can be physiological, where there is a change in the body function. Okay, and then a third one can be a change in the behavior, how the animal acts, how the animal behaves. Okay, so Any of these three, if there is a modification, if there is a characteristic, either which is structural, which is physiological, or which is in terms of behavior, and if that change, if that modification is helping the animal to survive or to reproduce more, then you can say that modification, that characteristic is actually an adaptation. The third concept is communication. So mostly animals also communicate, and they do this communication using either sounds. So you see birds, we can hear them singing all over. That is a communication. You will hear, for example, lions, they will roar. Okay. The cats will also make various types of sounds. Then they can as well communicate through body movements. We've seen how the bee waggle dance communicates not only the direction of the food, but also the distance. Another way through which animals can communicate is when they use chemical signals. These chemical signals mostly they refer to as pheromones. Okay. Then another one is visual signs. Okay. So they are signals that you can see by your naked eye. In this case, for example, when there is bright colors among the peacock. Okay. So once the colors brighten, that peacock will be communicating something. We've seen that the chemical signals are also referred to as pheromones. So what are pheromones? Pheromones are chemicals which are released by an animal. And those chemicals, they will affect the behavior of other animals which belong to the same species as the animal that has released those chemicals. So it means if the chemicals have been released by a dog, they will mainly affect dogs. If a chemical has been released by cats, then that chemical, that pheromone, will affect how cats behave. Okay. Among ants, hii mchwa, they use pheromones to guide others to where food is. Okay. So ile inakuja ya kwanza itawacha chemicals along the path. Okay. So ingine itafuata tu those pheromones, those chemicals mpaka ifikie chakula. Okay. So in summary, ethology just refers to that branch of science that studies how animals in their natural environments behave. Okay. So when you are studying from a scientific perspective the behavior of animals in their natural environments, then that is ethology. Through ethology, we can understand how behavior develops. Okay. We can also understand how behavior aids or helps survival. Then, equally, ethology can also help us to understand how behavior evolves or changes. For us to understand all this, then we need animal models that we can study. And that is now what ethology does. We equally can understand the way animals communicate to each other. Okay, we can also be in a position to understand how animals become adapted to their environment. So, in short, ethology helps us to understand how animals live, how animals survive, how animals reproduce, and how these same animals interact with their world or with their natural environment. Okay. So we saw the four main questions of ethology that were brought about by Nicholas Tinbergen. Okay. So according to Nicholas Tinbergen, for one to understand behavior, then is only possible through answering those four questions. Okay. So if you understand all the four questions, if you answer all the four questions, then you avoid giving incomplete answers about behavior of any animal. If, for example, there is a dog that is barking, unaona umbwa inabweka, you might ask yourself, why is that dog barking? Mbona hiyo umbwa inabweka? Then the second thing, what taught it to bark? Kitu gani ilifunza hiyo umbwa kubweka? Ilijifunza ama ilisikiza mamake akibweka ama ilifanya namna gani? Then the third question that you might want to ask, is that barking useful to the dog? If the dog doesn't bark and another one barks, is there any usefulness that the dog, which has the ability to bark, derives from barking that the one which cannot bark does not enjoy? Okay. So you are now trying to compare a dog which barks and a dog which does not bark to understand, is barking useful to the dog? Then the last question we might also want to answer is, how has this barking evolved? Has this barking changed among dogs? Okay. So when you look at each of these four questions, what made that dog to bark? Then how did that dog learn to bark? Then is barking in any way useful to the dog? And finally, has that barking evolved? Has that barking changed among dogs? So each of those questions will be looking for a different kind of explanation. It's answering a different thing. Okay. So let's look at these four questions a bit more carefully. So the first thing is causation. What is happening inside the dog at that particular time? Because whatever is happening inside it is what will have caused that dog to behave the way it is behaving. Okay. So causation asks the question on causation, the question on mechanism. It looks at what is happening inside the body of that animal at that particular point, because that is likely what will have immediately caused that behavior. So causation then focuses on anything either inside the body or outside the body of that animal within the environment that will have triggered that behavior. So the aspect of causation looks at the triggers. Are they internal? Are they external? Anything that leads an animal to behave the way it is behaving, that is a trigger. Okay? Ukikanyaga umbwa alafu ibweke, ni hiyo kuikanyaga ndio imefanya ikabweka. So ile kitu inafanya ule mnyama afanye kitu fulani, that is a trigger. Is that thing coming from inside the animal or within the environment? Okay, so the question on causation, what is causing the animal to behave the way it is behaving? Okay, so what is the immediate cause? What is the trigger? Is that trigger inside the body of the animal? Is that trigger outside? Okay. So in this, then you look at something you can call the stimulus. A stimulus is something in the environment that causes a particular reaction. Okay. So if you step on the dog, then the dog barks. You are stepping on it. That is what stimulated it. That is what made the animal to react the way it reacted. Then within animals, we have hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers. Okay. These are chemical messengers and they control various activities within our bodies, the bodies of animals. Then you have the neurons. These are the nerve cells that carry information, okay? They convey information throughout the body. Okay, so information can come, for example, take information to the brain, take information to the body. The senses, okay, this the information, the messaging between the brain, between the body, that is transmitted by nerve cells. Okay, so under causation, let's look at this example. If there is a bird which is singing, so hiyo kuimba ya ndege, okay? So we want to understand why is this bird singing? So if it is, for example, during the breeding season, then most likely you realize that possibly the daylight has increased. Okay, so the days are longer. We have longer days. So the bird is experiencing an increase in the exposure to daylight. Because of that, the body of the bird will now produce more testosterone, which is now a what? A hormone. So this hormone will activate certain areas in the brain of the bird. Then once those areas in the brain of the bird have been activated, then the bird will begin to sing. Okay? So if you look at this series of events, then this behavior, in this case, the singing of the bird, what has caused it? One, environmental stimulus. There is an increase in the length, the amount of time that the bird is now being exposed to light. That increase, that environmental stimulus, hiyo ndio imesababisha the production of more testosterone. Then once more of this hormone has been produced in response to the longer daylight, this hormone will activate some areas in the brain of the bird. Then that bird will begin singing. So the singing of the bird in this case is caused by one, the environmental stimulus, having longer daylight exposure. Longer daylight exposure leads to changes in the hormone concentration because the body is now producing more testosterone. Once there is a higher concentration of this hormone, that hormone now goes and activates areas within the brain of the bird. Once those areas are activated, then the bird begins to sing. So the causes of the singing have now been shown. One of them is external. The environmental stimulus is happening outside the body of the bird. Then two of them are internal, okay, because they are happening inside the body of the bird. Let's look at the second example. If you accidentally touch anything that is hot, the heat, the increased temperature will stimulate pain receptors. So you will notice the pain. Then the nerves will send signals to your brain. Then you will quickly withdraw the hand from that hot object. Okay. So why are you behaving that way? What caused you to behave? Okay. What caused you to behave? Kutoa hiyo mkono haraka namna hii. There was a change in the stimulus external. Then it was picked by nerves. Okay. So the heat ilikuwa nje is an external stimulus. But once you put your hand on that place that has an increased temperature, which is hot, then the pain receptors on your hand picked that increased temperature. Then you sensed something. Those pain receptors connected to the nerves will send that signal to the brain. Then your brain will quickly, to save you from burning, you now withdraw your hand. So the aspect of causation just refers to the mechanism behind the action. What is it that has led to a particular action? Okay. What caused the animal to act in a particular way? So the causation question explains how the behavior of an animal works biologically. Okay. So let's look at the second question, which is development. With the question on development, you are looking at how does behavior grow or how does behavior change over time. When you look at development, then a particular term which is important in this case comes up, and that is ontogeny. Ontogeny just refers to the development of an individual from birth to adulthood. So there are some behaviors which are fully instinctive. Such behaviors are present at birth. But there are other behaviors which are learned or acquired. Then, of course, there are other behaviors which are a combination of both. Let's begin with an example when a lion is hunting. So, a lion cub, that is a young one of a lion, is born with the instincts to hunt. But then it watches the adult lions as they go hunting. Then it begins to practice how to chase prey. Then with practice, it keeps improving over time. Okay. So it means then, even if the young one of a lion, which we are calling a cub in this case, is born with the instincts to hunt, it does not become a skilled hunter immediately, but it develops that skill gradually. It practices, it watches other lions hunting, then over time it will improve on its hunting skills. A combination of instinctive, it was born with the instincts, but it has to learn and improve on its skills so that it can become a good hunter. That is a combination of both. How does that behavior develop? Okay, so it gets better with time. Why? It's watching others doing it, it practices, so it has to improve with time. Another example on the development is how birds learn songs. So there are some birds which must hear adult birds singing so they can then know, okay, that, oh, so this is how you sing. Then after they've heard an adult bird singing, they also begin to sing. But for them to sing better, they have to practice repeatedly. Okay, so they have to sing over and over. They practice over and over, and then as they sing severally, in the process, they now refine that particular song. So with the time, then they now end up being better singers. So in this case, if the bird does not learn, in the absence of learning, then the song might not be correct because it has to listen, it has to hear a bird singing. Then it has to practice, it has to repeat over and over because before it can now get at its very best when it is singing that particular song. So in this case, for the bird, the development will explain how genes and experience shape behavior over time. Okay? So experience, listening, practicing over and over. Okay? Then that improves that particular behavior. So it means the behavior has been changing with time. How was it changing? It was getting better with time because the animal was practicing over and over. There was a question on function. What is the value that this particular behavior brings to the animal? Okay. Is that behavior useful to the animal? So the function question asks, how does that particular behavior help the animal to survive and or reproduce better? We saw that an adaptation is any trait, is any characteristic that not only improves survival but also increases reproduction. With the reproductive success, you are just referring to the ability of an organism to produce offsprings that can survive until they reproduce. Okay? So it's not just when an offspring reproduces, gives offsprings, when an organism gives offsprings. But those offsprings have to survive until they reproduce. Then now you can say there has been a reproductive success. So in terms of the function question, okay, in terms of looking at whether a certain behavior is useful for an animal to survive and or reproduce, let's look at the example of a gazelle running. Okay, so we know that gazelles can run very fast. Through this running, it can help these gazelles to escape a predator. If there is an animal running after the gazelle, if there is a lion, if there is a leopard, a gazelle that is able to run very fast is more likely to do what? To escape that predator, then it will survive. The gazelle that has survived is the one that is likely to reproduce. Then it means a gazelle which has survived because it was able to run fast, then it has traits that are related to its ability to run fast. Because it is reproducing, then those traits are passed to the offsprings. So in this case, then, the ability of a gazelle to run fast is what enabled it to survive. So it means fast running, the ability of a gazelle to run fast, confers a survival advantage. So running fast for a gazelle, it has a survival function. Okay. So why a gazelle should run fast? It enables it to survive. Once it has survived, then it can be in a position to reproduce. Okay. So we said is a behavior that an animal portrays able to confer survival and reproductive advantage. We've seen the ability of a gazelle to run fast confers those two advantages. The second example, we look at what we call grooming in primates. With grooming, it happens a lot among monkeys, among baboons, and within monkeys, for example, when they are grooming, they groom each other. So one monkey grooms the other, then the other will, in return, groom it. That grooming helps in the removal of parasites from their bodies. Okay? Because ikitengeneza mwingine, if there is a parasite in the process, itatoa. So grooming then inasaidia kupunguza the number of parasites that can be present on the body of a primate. The second thing that grooming does ni kwamba it strengthens the social bonds. The monkeys that groom each other, socially, they become more close to each other. So they are more tight. They are friends to each other. Okay. Then because of that, that grooming will also help to reduce stress. So when there is a stronger social bond, because the primates are helping each other to groom, then that strong social bond will mean the primates will be together, many in number. And the more they are, because they have a stronger social bond, that will help that group to survive. Because zikikuwa mingi pamoja, zitasaidiana kutoroka, zitasaidiana kama ni kushika ile chakula inataka. So the stronger the social bond between these primates, the higher the chance that the group of primates entangled together by that strong social bond, will have a higher chance of surviving. So it means then this grooming has a way to ensure that more primates, more monkeys, which help each other to groom, then have a stronger social bond together, most of them will have a higher chance to survive as a group. Okay. So in this case then, function explains why a certain behavior which an animal is portraying has been favored by natural selection. Because if the behavior was not beneficial to the animal, most likely the animal will have stopped behaving that way. Okay. So if a behavior has been part of an animal's life ever since, it just means that behavior confers something favorable. Okay. And for that behavior to still be present for all this time, there must be something that is selecting that behavior to enable it to survive within that particular environment. So whatever is favoring that behavior, in this case, we refer to it as natural selection. Okay, because it's something in nature, something in the immediate environment. That is what is favoring that behavior to continue being practiced by those animals. The other question is the question on evolution. So, how did this particular behavior originate in the species? Okay. And has that behavior been changing over many generations? Okay. We saw the honeybee and the waggle dance. That once honeybees are performing this waggle dance, then they not only show the direction, but also the distance. Okay, so direction of where the food is and the distance to where that particular food is. So the bees that will communicate their food locations will then have a higher chance to gather more food. Okay, so once you are able to communicate, once as a bee they are able to communicate to show the direction and the distance to where food is located, then they will have a higher chance that they can gather more food because it will not only be able to direct more bees from their colonies to the right direction, but also the right distance. So through such, it will then mean because the colony got the right information, the right communication on the direction and distance, then that colony is likely to survive better compared to another colony. So over generations, then, this bit of communication must have been better refined. Okay. So when you look at these honeybees, the worker bees, they have a very highly organized system as they communicate the direction and the distance of that particular food. That communication, as we saw, is through the waggle dance. How has the waggle dance become highly organized? Because it is a very important thing for the bees. If you are able to dance as a bee, and in the process of dancing, accurately show direction and estimate distance, then you are likely to increase the chances of the colonies that you belong to, for those colonies to go in the right direction and have an estimate of the distance between where they are and where the food is. So then over time, such being a very important aspect of behavior, it must be not only kept but also improved and become highly refined. So evolution in this case, the question of evolution in terms of behavior tries to explain how the behavior within the species has developed over time. Okay? How that behavior has developed over time. And mostly, if the behavior is beneficial, that behavior will be perfected with time. Tumeona kama the waggle dance, sababu ni kitu cha muhimu for the bee to show members of its colonies the right direction and to give them a correct estimation of the amount of distance, how far. That is an important thing. So it has to be refined so that you give the correct direction, but also the correct estimate of the distance. If you want to remember the 4 questions for animal behavior, anytime you see an animal doing something, just ask what is causing that animal to do whatever it's doing at that particular point. You see an animal barking, ask yourself what is making this animal to bark now. So that is the mechanism. Okay, that's the causation. Then ask again, how did barking develop in that particular animal? If it's a dog, how did barking develop in the dog? Did it learn it? Okay, was it born knowing how to bark? Okay, so that is development or ontogeny. Then why is it that the animal is doing what it is doing? Is it useful? So what is the function Okay, what is the function of that particular activity that the animal is doing at that particular time? Then the last question you can ask is, how did that particular behavior that the animal is practicing at that particular time, how has that behavior evolved in the species? Has it improved? Has it not improved? Okay. So let's see now how we can apply all the four questions in one-to-one behavior. Let's take an example when a bird is migrating. What will cause? What will be the causation? What is the mechanism? Okay, because the bird is migrating, it's in a hammer. There are changes in daylight. If there are changes in daylight, they will affect hormones. Then once the hormones have been affected, they will trigger restlessness. Then the bird now has to do what? To migrate. So what has caused it? An external trigger, a change in daylight. That change in daylight, an external trigger, has triggered an internal one, a change in the hormone concentration. The hormonal imbalance triggers restlessness, still an internal stimulus. Then, as a result, the bird now has to do what? To move out from that particular place. How has bird migration developed in birds? Okay, so young birds will most likely learn the migration routes from adults. Then, with the time now, they will inherit those instincts of direction. So, the development is young birds will learn those routes from adults. Okay. So, they are not born knowing, they have to learn. The function of that behavior, is it helping survival? Is it increasing reproductive success? So migration will mostly allow birds to avoid extreme weather. Okay, migration will as well help animals or birds to find food, to obtain food. Then migration will also help to improve in the breeding success. So zinaweza toka pahali penye kuna predators ziende penye hakuna. Then because they've migrated, it will mean the eggs will not be eaten, so there will be possibly an increase in the hatching numbers. The last bit on evolution, how the migration has changed. Okay, so mostly birds that are able to migrate will be in a better position to survive the seasonal changes. Okay, so if the ones that were not able to migrate and remained possibly in an extreme environment, maybe it's too cold or too hot, they are likely to have died. Then the ones that were able to migrate to go to a better place, the ones that were able to migrate to move away from predators, they are more likely to have survived. Okay. And once that survival happens, then the ability to migrate, the ones that migrated will now be in a better position to even teach the others how to do what? To migrate. So the traits of migration will be sort of genetically established in these birds because they benefited from migrating. So they know they have to teach others. Okay. The ones that they are giving birth to also have to know that migration is a great survival advantage. So the framework that Tinbergen gave of the four questions is an important framework in ethology because it helps scientists to conserve animals. Okay. So when you understand the behavior of animals, then you are in a better position to protect the same species. Okay. When you also understand the natural behavior, how an animal behaves in nature, then you can improve the welfare of that animal when you are putting it either on a farm or in a zoo. Okay. Equally, when you understand the mechanism that connects behavior to brain function, for example, then that enhances our understanding of neuroscience and psychology. So through ecology, through ethology and the four questions that help us to understand behavior in animals, then we can, in line with the same, also enhance our understanding of neuroscience. Because now we understand that if something happens, then there'll be a change in hormonal concentration. Then the change in the hormonal concentration will trigger a certain change, will relay some message, then the animal will respond. Okay. So Tinbergen has mainly taught us that behavior has several layers of explanation. When someone behaves in a particular way, there are layers, there are several explanations. Okay. For example, there is something that will help in explaining the immediate biological cause. What has caused that person to behave the way they did at that particular time? That's the immediate biological cause. There will also be another layer that we can try to understand how that behavior has developed in the lifetime of that particular organism. Then we also need to understand the survival benefits of that behavior. Has that behavior got to help that animal survive more, reproduce more? Okay, that's the survival benefit. Then, lastly, we also need to understand how that behavior has been changing, how that behavior has evolved, okay, in that particular species of animals. So, when you are trying to understand animal behavior, then you must examine all those four layers. So, you can't just explain behavior using one reason. But behavior will have a biological cause. Behavior will most likely develop over time. Behavior will most likely be serving a particular purpose, and behavior also might be having an evolutionary history so that the behavior has been changing among animals. Okay. So having looked at the four questions in animal behavior, let's now try to understand the various types of animal behavior. Okay, so we'll have animals behaving in different ways, and they will behave differently so that possibly they can enhance their survival. They will also be behaving differently so that they can have a higher opportunity to find food. Equally, they might be behaving differently so that they can have an increased opportunity to access mates and reproduce. So the way animals behave has been grouped by scientists into various types so that we can understand these types better. So one is the innate behavior or the instinctive behavior. This one refers to something that an animal is born knowing how to do. That animal does not need to learn. It does not need to practice. Okay. So that behavior, which is innate, is automatic. Okay. And most often it is triggered by something in the environment. What triggers a behavior is what we call the stimulus. Examples of these innate behaviors is when the sea turtles crawl towards the ocean immediately after hatching. So no one is teaching them kwamba tembea muende huku ndio kuna ocean. But after the sea turtles has hatched, they begin crawling towards the sea. That is a behavior that instinctive. It is instinctive. They are born knowing it. No one needs to teach them. They don't need to practice it. Once they hatch off towards the ocean. Another instinctive behavior is among the spiders. When they have that ability to spin webs, just the first time they try it out. They don't need to try it, fail, then improve. No, they just begin making the spider webs. No one taught them. So it's something that they were born knowing how to do. Innate behavior is important because it helps animals to survive without the risk of making mistakes. Okay. So if, for example, the baby turtles, if they could need to be taught that they have to go towards the ocean, chances are high that those ones who will not be able to begin crawling towards the ocean, they will not survive. But because they are born knowing that once you hatch off, you go to the ocean. So they don't need to be taught, and that reduces chances that they can make a mistake. Because if they make a mistake, it increases the risk that they will do what? They will not survive in return. The second type of animal behavior is the learned behavior. Learned behavior is what develops through experience. Okay. So in this case, then the animals will pick the learned behavior by trying different things, observing others. Okay. So through learning, then the animal is able to survive in a changing environment. Okay. Because the animal is learning how to behave, how to survive in a particular environment. So it is surviving, it's learning survival techniques, it's learning the survival techniques, and they enhance its ability to survive, even if the conditions are changing. This learned behavior occurs in several types. The first type of learned behavior is what we call habituation. Mostly ukiona the pigeons, hizo njiwa, the expectation is ukipita karibu na njiwa, it needs to fly away. Okay? But when it happens that the pigeons ama hizo njiwa ziko in a busy place, like in a city or in a town, most of them will now not be flying away from people because they've realized that people in this place are not a threat. Okay? So once certain animals have realized that this particular thing is no longer important, then they begin to ignore. And that is habituation. So you learn to ignore something that is not important. The pigeons in a busy town or city, they will stop flying when people are walking because they realize as these people walk, they are not endangering us. They are not in any way interested in us. They are just doing their own things. So those pigeons then will just assume they will not fly away. Okay? Ukikuja uwashike ndio wataendelea kuburuka. but wanaona leo, jana ulipita huku washika, leo unapita huwashiki, so wanaona hakuna haja ya kufanya namna gani ya kutoroka. Another type of learned behavior is what we call classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is when an animal learns a particular behavior by associating, that is connecting one thing with another. So when they see one thing, they associate it with another thing. Okay? So that is classical conditioning. You are learning by association. Okay? So you connect what you see with what will happen after you've seen what you had initially seen. We have cases, for example, where dogs will salivate when a bell is rung. Why are they salivating? Just at the sound of a bell. Because if the bell rings, na wanapewa chakula. Anytime the bell rings, wanapewa chakula. So it means once they hear the sound of a bell, then they associate that sound with what? With food. So they begin salivating, not because they've seen food, but they've associated the ringing of that bell with the next activity which follows. And that activity is food. Okay. So that is, they've learned by association. Wanasikia kengele, wanajua chakula inakuja. Anytime unagonga kengele, unawapea chakula. Unagonga kengele, unawapea chakula. So wakisikia tu kengele, wanakuwa tayari kwamba chakula inakuja. Another type is what we call the operant conditioning. With operant conditioning is when an animal is learning either through rewards or punishment. So a rat, for example, might press a particular lever. When it stops somewhere, ikiweka mguu yake mahali, then chakula inatoka. Ikikanyaga mahali, chakula inakuja. So by doing that, because when it puts its, ikikanyaga mahali chakula inatoka, ikikanyaga mahali chakula inatoka. So itarudia. If it, the reward in this case, after it puts its leg somewhere, is there is food coming. That is a reward. But ikikanyaga alafu ikatwe, haitarudia. Okay? So with operant conditioning, the animal is learning either by being rewarded or by being punished. If the animal gets rewarded, then it keeps doing whatever it has learned. But if the animal gets a punishment, then it will stop doing it. Ndio mara mingi kama labda nyinyi hamjalima na ng'ombe, lakini ukilima na ng'ombe kuna wakati unatoa sauti fulani na unapiga ng'ombe. So inafika mahali ikisikia umetoa hiyo sauti itapinduka, because inajua tu ukitoa hii sauti what follows ni kuipiga. Okay? So if you reward, the animal keeps doing it. But if you punish, then the animal does not do it. The people who, if you've seen people move with donkeys on the road, someone will tell the donkey stop and it stands. Go and it goes. Okay? Possibly because for it to learn those words, ikiambiwa stop and it does not stop, ilikuwa inapigwa. So ikisikia to stop, to avoid the punishment, it has to do whatever it is. Okay. Then another type of learned behavior is the observational learning. And just like the word observational here, it means the animal learns by watching others. And after it has watched, it will then copy those actions. Okay. So if, for example, the young chimpanzees, they learn how to use sticks to get termites by watching older chimpanzees doing the same. So they observe that when you have a stick, ukitoa hivi, kumbe kumbe inakuja. So hizo pia zitaanza kutumia the same thing. Imprinting, which we saw, is also a type of learned behavior. This is a special type of learning which happens at a critical early stage in the life of an animal, and it is mostly permanent. Okay? So with imprinting, it is learning that happens very early in the life of that particular animal. Then mostly, once that learning has happened, it will be permanent. Okay? We saw that the ducklings will follow the first moving object they see after hatching. Okay. So after the duck has hatched, those ducklings they will follow the first thing yenye itakuwa ina first moving thing ile wataona ikipita hapo. Okay. And all ducklings have that behavior imprinted in them. The third type of animal behavior is social behavior. Social behavior happens when animals interact with members of their own species. Okay. So it's an interaction between members of one type of species. That interaction, that behavior, in a way, should help those animals belonging to that particular species to survive better. And in the process, they protect each other. Okay. So because they protect each other, then it means they can also help raising the young ones. So you might have seen that elephants will most likely, if you've seen elephants anywhere, ukienda kwa game park, it's very difficult kuona elephant ikikuwa peke yake. They will move together in herds. Ukiona moja, jua tu zingine ziko karibu. Okay? So that help inazisaidia so that they can take care of each other and also help in caring for their babies. The wolves, they also go hunting together in packs because there are many together hunting jointly as a group. That increases chances kwamba zinaweza ua a bigger animal. Okay, they can kill now a bigger animal. So through social behavior, it means that there is a lot of teamwork and cooperation in animals. So they are working as a team. They are cooperating on a particular task. Okay. The fourth type of animal behavior is the communication behavior. And this just refers to how animals send and receive messages. So if an animal wants to communicate, which sound, which signal will it use? Then if an animal has to receive communication from other animals, which signal will it rely on? Some of these signals can be visual, ile inaona na macho, like in the case of the peacock, when all of a sudden the plumage, the color of the feathers has changed. It's become more colorful. That's visual. At times, there is sound. Okay, you find birds singing, frogs, they begin singing. Then they smell in the case of the what? The pheromones. But in other animals, there will be touch. So they can communicate through either visual, sound, smell, or touch. So communication will help animals by warning them against danger. Okay. So if there is a particular sound that the animals will produce, then other animals of the same species might hear that sound, then they know there is danger. For the birds, when they are singing, they are looking for a what? A mate. So they will attract a mate from a similar species. Also, through communication, members of a particular group end up being coordinated properly. The fifth type of animal behavior is with respect to mating and reproduction. So, mating and reproductive behavior, they help animals to find mates and to reproduce successfully. So, in terms of birds, for example, when male birds sing, they attract females. Okay. When frogs call loudly, it shows they are ready to mate. So when a frog hears a particular sound, it will know that the frog which is producing this sound, this is what it is communicating. So it will respond. Okay. And because in this case the loud call will be in line, will be calling for a mate, the one that will hear the sound will respond and go. Then once it gets there, mating will happen. Then reproduction will follow. Okay. The sixth type of behavior is about aggression and territorial behavior. Aggression refers to fighting or threatening other animals so that you are either fighting them or you are threatening them so that you protect either resources or mates. So anytime the resources are limited, then there has to be aggression. There has to be that ability to try and protect the limited resources from other competitors. Okay. So that territorial behavior refers to defending a space that belongs to the animal. You don't want any other animal to walk into your space. How do you do that? You become very aggressive and you fight any other animal that will want to come into your space. Because whatever is found within that space possibly is limited. So you don't want any other competitor. So you're trying to to ward off any other competitor that will come into your territory and increase competition. So through aggression and territorial behavior, then animals are able to prevent competition and protect resources which are not only important but also limited. The seventh type of behavior is the foraging behavior. Foraging just refers to how animals find, catch, and eat food. To forage ni kwenda kutafuta huko. So that behavior, how the animal behaves when it's trying to look for food, after it's found it, how does it catch it? And after it has caught it, how does it even eat the food? Okay. So animals will always try to find or obtain food in the easiest and most energy efficient way. Unaenda kutafuta chakula sababu unasikia njaa. So you don't want again to waste a lot of energy trying to find food. So lazima utafute njia ambayo hautumii nguvu nyingi kutafuta chakula ili upate nini? Nguvu. Okay. So several animals will then try to find food and store mapema. Okay. So the good foraging within an animal will help the animals to survive and stay healthy. If an animal is able to find, to obtain food, to store that food, then that animal will be able to survive longer, even when food is not available in sufficient quantities. Because when the availability of food goes down, only the animals that are able to access what they stored are the ones that are likely to survive. And the animal that has the best foraging abilities, the animal that is able to obtain food using the least amount of energy. So such an animal will be a good forager. Okay. The eighth behavior is the parental care behavior. This refers to the actions that parents take either to feed or protect or care for their young ones. So you'll find birds, for example, feeding their young ones. Then they will cover them in the wings to protect them, to care for them. Okay? So they will build a nest, and that will be the home for the young ones. In terms of the kangaroo, they will carry their babies in their pouches. Okay? So with the parental care, the animal is just trying to increase chances that the young ones will also survive. If the animal is not able to feed, to protect, and take care of its young ones, then chances that the young ones will survive will drop. If the young ones of that particular animal don't survive, then the generation of that animal will not extend. Okay? Because kama vifaranga hawataishi, then inamaanisha the genes za hiyo kuku will not be perpetuated in the what? In the next generation. There is what we call the play behavior, which is common in young animals. When you look at young animals, they play a lot. You look at the kitten, the young ones of cats, zinacheza kwa nyumba, zinaruka, zinafanya nini. Okay? So you think maybe that is not very useful, but it helps the animal to practice some very important skills. And those skills that the animal is practicing are very crucial for that particular animal to survive. So when you find, for example, the young ones of a lion, they will be playing as if they are fighting. But that playing as if they are fighting each other, it just helps them to practice how to hunt. Okay. The young ones of a monkey, they will try to wrestle each other. As they are wrestling, they are building their strength. Okay. They will be trying to jump around. They are practicing how to jump on trees, to jump from one tree to another. So it's not like the young animals just play. They are not playful. Okay. That through that play behavior of the young animals, they are practicing some very important survival skills. And these skills are very crucial, okay, as they prepare for adult life. So studying animal behavior is important because through it, as a scientist, as a biologist, you can understand then how animals survive and how they adapt to their environment. Also, through this, you can learn how those animals find food, their own food, how they avoid predators, and also how they reproduce. Through understanding animal behavior, as a scientist, it can help you to improve conservation efforts because you'll have understood an animal better. So you can put in efforts to protect a particular species, especially the ones that have reduced in number, the ones we call endangered ones. You protect them from becoming extinct. Okay. Then, of course, we talked about the neuroscience bit. Okay. We've seen the types of learned behavior. We talked about the habituation. Okay. We talked about the classical conditioning when it is associative behavior. You are associating a particular activity with something else. Okay. So something happens, then an animal is given food. Something happens, an animal is beaten. So then the animal begins to associate those two. That if I do this, I'm given food. But if I do this, I'm beaten. So it will mostly repeat what it is rewarded for. But it will almost all the time stop doing what it is punished for. Kwa mfano, if you have a cat, wale wenye wako na pets kwa nyumba, if you are trying to toilet train it, initially some people begin with some punishment. Okay, if it releases waste at a place that you don't want, you beat it. Okay. So with that, then it will know that if I do this at this particular place, I'll be beaten. So it will stop doing because it has associated doing this particular activity here attracts the second event. That second event is punishment. So when it does not do it, then it is not beaten. Okay. So through this, the animal does not decide that let me not do this, but it will be responding automatically after it has made the connection. When you touch the door, it knows you are coming. So with the time, once it hears the door opening, it runs towards the door. Not because it's seen you, but it knows once the door opens, then the next thing that is happening, my friend is coming in. So it associates those two events. The operant learning, we saw that. So you can just skim through what is happening from page 15. It's just more explanation about the various types of learned behavior in animals. So read through, there are more examples, more simplified, and I'm sure it will increase your learning. Okay. So just in summary, learned behavior allows animals to adapt to their environment because an animal will be learning from where it is. If you have an animal, an aquatic animal, it will learn whatever it is from an aquatic environment. Then there is a terrestrial animal, it will be learning from land. So whatever it learns will only be able to help it adapt to the environment. And once it's adapted to that particular environment, then it will aid that particular animal to survive even better. Okay. So through this is just a summary of the various types of learning, the learned behavior. Then now, the last bit is how we apply ethology, how we can apply the knowledge we have now in ethology. So once you've understood animal behavior, then through it, through understanding how an animal behaves, you can now improve conservation. You can improve farming. You can improve medicine. Okay. So let's see how that can happen. By understanding animal behavior, that can help us to conserve wildlife. Okay. Because once you know what animals need so that they can survive, then you can now provide whatever they need. Because once you provide what they need, they will survive more, then they will be protected. Okay. So for example, through studying elephants, scientists have been able to know the roads or the corridors that these elephants use, where they move, how they move from one place to another. So because of tracking them, because of following them, wakajua kwamba zinapenda kupitia hapa. Then in return now, they've created the corridors. So such a corridor is just a safe path where the animals can now pass. And how do you create a corridor? How do you create a path for the animal? You must have understood, you must have studied that animal and known that it moves from this place A to place B through this particular route. So what you do, you now safeguard that route. Then the animal will continue passing through that route. And because it's safeguarded, possibly even fenced, that will reduce conflicts between human and wildlife. Okay. Also, when you've understood animal behavior, you will know how the animals feel. Then now you can try to improve their welfare. Okay? Because once you know the type of sound that a cow produces, that will tell you if the cow is in pain or not. So with that, then you can respond to that particular sound. Okay. So once you understand what an animal needs, how an animal feels, then you can provide so that you enhance better life for the animal. How do you know what the animal needs? Through studying its behavior. Ethology can also help veterinary and medical research. So when you study how an animal behaves, then the veterinary people, the ones who treat animals, they will be in a position to know whether the animal is anxious, whether the animal is stressed or not. So once they've understood the behavior, because they know when the animal behaves this way, it is under stress. When it behaves this way, it's comfortable. So they can respond to the animal in line with the change in behavior. Okay. Then now for the medical aspect, at times when you study animals, especially the close relatives like the primates, the monkeys, the chimpanzees, they'll give you a clue about certain human conditions. So you can use animal models. And for you to study them, you must understand their behavior. Then, as you study them, then they give you an understanding about certain conditions in human beings as well. Because remember, there are some types of research which are not permitted on human beings, but you can study them. You can use animal models, then they give you a possible understanding of what will happen if the same was done on human beings. The other thing is ethology can also help in pest control and farming. We know insects and animals will always harm crops if they come in contact. But once you've understood how the animals behave, then you can use that behavior to control those animals naturally. When you understand, for example, how ants search for food, that can help you come up with the traps so that you can catch those ants. And by catching the ants, it will mean you'll have stopped them as possible pests or any danger they will cause to food, which is either growing or stored. You've understood them because you've studied their behavior. Ukajua zikianza kutafuta chakula, this is how they behave, this is where they move. So you will put traps based on how you've understood them. You can also look at locusts and understand their breeding habits. Once you've understood their breeding habits, then you can stop them from breeding. And once you stop that breeding, then you will stop the locust population from increasing. And once that population will have increased, it will have led to the damage of what? Crops. Okay. The other bit where ethology is important, there are people now who keep dogs, and there are others who train these dogs. Okay. So when you study the behavior of a dog, then it helps you to know how you can train those dogs. In the Western world, there are dogs which can be sent, for example, to the supermarket. They are sent to the shops. Okay. Before a dog gets to such a high level, it must have been trained for a long time. And whoever was training that dog must have understood the behavior of dogs. Okay. So what they do, they write something in a bag, then wanavalisha hiyo mbwa, then the dog leaves. So once it gets to the shop, whoever is at the shop takes whatever note that the dog has, reads it, takes whatever is written on the note, puts it in the bag, then the dog goes back home. Okay. For the dog to know such level of instructions, it must have been trained. Whoever trained it must have understood clearly how dogs behave. So must have studied animal behavior, in this case, dog behavior. Also, you can understand how the environment is changing just by looking at animals. Saa ingine unaangalia venye ndege wanahama na unajua hii ndege ikihama namna hii kuna uwezekano mvua inakuja ama kiangazi inakuja. Okay? Before you can understand that, you must have studied, you must have followed the migration patterns of that particular animal. Because if a particular bird moves, particular birds zikipita tu hivi mingi unajua hai mvua iko karibu. And you must have heard maybe your parents or your grandparents saying that. So before they get to such level by associating the movement or the migration of certain animals with a particular change in the environment, then they must have studied the behavior of that animal. Okay. You can also understand evolution and genetics by studying animals. Okay. So the way animals behave, we've seen that behavior has evolved over time. So you can track such and study. Okay. So ethology, which is a scientific study of how animals behave, comes with a lot of benefits. When you understand how animals behave, how animals act, then you can be in a position to protect animals from becoming extinct. You can be in a position to make the animals happier because you know what makes them happy, so you provide it. You can be in a position to improve farming. You can be in a position to understand psychology. Okay? So when you watch animals carefully, okay, through watching animals carefully, that means through studying animals, you can eventually help humans. You can also help animals, and you can also help the what? The environment. Okay. So ethology, in a way, does not just help animals, it also helps human beings, and by extension, it helps the environment. Okay. So that will mark the end of this discussion on ethology. Read through the notes, listen to this explanation, and in case you have a question, please reach out either using my email. The email is here, or I know most of you have my phone number. You can also reach out. Otherwise, thank you. And I think this is the last lecture for our ethology unit. Thank you, and we'll keep in touch. Asante.